Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Catherine Grill, and welcome back to another Neolth Ask the Experts live stream event. It's December, and a lot of you have been asking, following our last live stream in November around holiday stress, to talk more about holiday stress and just some of the pressures that we face going into this holiday season. So I'm here again with my colleague, Dr. Claire Wheeler, to really talk about holiday pressure and dive deeper into that topic. So Dr. Wheeler, thank you so much for being here today. I'm wondering if you can kick us off by introducing yourself and then really diving into some of the pressures and stresses that people might face going into the holiday season that affect their mental health.
Hello, and hello to everyone watching. It's wonderful to be here again. I'm Dr. Claire Wheeler, the Chief Medical Officer at Neolth and university professor and psychologist. And so I was just commiserating with Dr. Grill about the fact that I'm very behind on my shopping. I have a lot of food to prepare and people are coming from out of town. And so there's a lot going on right now, whether you're hosting or you're visiting or you're traveling to be with family. The stressors are many around this time, and not to mention the fact that we have a weather report that is a little bit unnerving for travel and even just for getting around town. So needing to just strategize a lot of the logistics, that's a whole big piece right there. But on top of that is the emotion and the tradition and the expectations of the holidays that make this not just another hectic time of the year, but one that actually goes to the very heart of what's really meaningful and important to us. And so that's why, in my opinion, the stress of this particular season is often felt most profoundly by people, unlike stressors around, say, Easter or Passover or the 4th of July. So I think it is important that we're having this conversation today.
Absolutely. We've been getting a lot of questions from students around this, just going into, final season. And then it's always a strange shift from you going 100 miles an hour to final season to being on a break, and the pace of life changes. And then you might be traveling or going back home and being around different people in a different environment. And that can just cause a lot of disruption to your lifestyle and to stress. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about some of the warning signs. I think there's, like you mentioned, this overwhelming pressure to be perfect and all these expectations around the holidays. But it would be good to keep in the back of our mind what those warning signs are that our mental health is starting to struggle and we might need to set some boundaries or take a break.
Yes, I think this is so important because it's kind of like these things can sort of creep up on you. And before you know it, you may be in a very stressed out state and it just kind of happened. Or maybe things build and then one thing happens and it snaps. And you kind of lose all of your best intentions. So it's good to have a little bit of a preventive mindset about all this. And we'll talk more about strategies in a minute. But some things to look, even before you head out or start to gather, is stuff like, are you really looking forward to everything that you've committed yourself to do over the next 2 weeks? And really sit down with yourself and do a gut check. Even, how do I feel about doing this? Is this really what I want to participate in? Now, some of these things feel very obligatory or necessary, or you're required to do them, right? You can't just not go to do these things. And then in that case, it's really a matter of checking with yourself to see what kind of reserve do you have. Again, after fall term, if you're in school and finals and everything, really take stock of how much resilience you feel you have right now, so that you know what you're, kind of where you need to really step back and engage in self-care. So some of the things to look at, aside from looking forward to the next 2 weeks with any sense of dread or other stressful feelings, is then when you're in the moment, during the next couple of weeks when all this stuff is happening is stuff like being irritable or feeling impatient or just wanting to get things over with, especially when you're around people that you love and haven't seen for a while, but suddenly they're just getting on your nerves. That's a good warning sign that maybe you just need a little time to yourself. Other things like trouble sleeping. It's really hard to change your routine or your location and then maintain a good sleep schedule. And then there's pressure to stay up late or get up early and do stuff all day that you might not be used to doing, like shopping. So it's very fatiguing. And so it's important to keep a very good close eye on fatigue level and your energy levels, and try to keep that, from going to extremes. And another thing is just your sense of joy and awe and wonder. I think that these holidays, whatever tradition your family celebrates, a lot of that is most magical when you're little kids, and when you're even a teenager, the excitement and what's going to happen. And if some of that excitement is fading for you, or if it just seems to be missing, that's another sign. Like it just feels like you're going through the motions. That is a really important thing to watch out for, because those are all indicators that are somewhat subtle, but then they can become less subtle over time, that you really need a break. And it's possible to take little breaks and do good things for yourself in the midst of all this.
Okay, so a couple warning signs to watch out for: things like changes in mood, irritability, feeling sad or depressed, feeling overwhelmed because we have such a long to-do list, even changes in sleep. So what I'm hearing is that there are these warning signs we want to look out for, and we feel all this pressure, right? These expectations, like we have to do everything. Our to-do lists are so long, but it's actually really important and okay to set boundaries and to be able to say no. I actually was talking to someone recently and heard about the most amazing strategy that this family does, where they communicate kind of going into the holidays or even vacations and family trips around, here's what I would like to do. Here's the ways I can contribute to the family and the traditions. And here's the ways that I do not want to participate, or here's the ways I need some self-care. So they actually write it out in a list, and everybody communicates that beforehand. And I thought, what an amazing way to communicate and set boundaries with each other, because that's going to be so important going into this, just knowing how do I take out some time, planning strategies to manage some of this pressure and just take time for myself and not feel guilty about it. So Dr. Wheeler, could you share some other strategies for how to manage that stress and really set boundaries if needed?
Sure, that's absolutely essential, and it's for those of you who are in college perhaps and going home, one thing that often happens is that we sort of regress, like we go back to a 6-year-old or 12-year-old self. And I think it's helpful for you to just maintain your sense of self and remember that you're to the extent that you're fully functioning and doing well in the world, and then you go home and it's like, oh, now I got to be a kid again. You can compartmentalize, and yes, you definitely need boundaries to say, yeah, I'm a grown up now, or I'm a big kid now, and this is how I want to participate in the holidays. Um, you know, myths are all around the holidays. They shift as you get older, and the things that you believe in change, and so that can be challenging as well. If your holidays tend to be have a religious overtone, that's another thing to think ahead about. How much that is still relevant and meaningful to you. So what you can do really is communicate with your family if you have a family like that. If you don't, then it's really kind of a conversation you can have with yourself, or maybe you can find allies within your family system or the system of people that you're going to be with, and start maybe a conversation with them, and maybe look and consider this a step in the direction that you would like things to go, rather than I want everything to change this year because I'm uncomfortable with this, that, and the other thing. Just remember that if you're working with elders, these are people who have been doing these things for years and years and years, and maybe they've never questioned it. So you may be bringing a breath of fresh air into people's perspectives. And some people, like we've had this happen in our family, and it's been like, oh, what a relief. I don't have to make this casserole every year anymore, because it turns out after 10 years, everybody hates it, right? So these conversations and the communication are absolutely critical. Another thing is, I think it's helpful to plan time for yourself for each day, whether it's only 5 minutes or a half hour. If you've been using some of the practices on Neolth, it's really nice to kind of have that in your back pocket. As you know, our practices range in time length, so you can even squeeze something into 2 minutes. But just don't. That's another thing that often happens during this season. If you've been eating well and getting your workouts or doing your Neolth practices, all of those routines are often blown up by all the stuff happening right now. So to the extent that you can, maybe you can sit down with a planner and say, okay, I am going to stick to this. I'm going to let some of this go, right? You don't need to be rigid about it. Like, okay, maybe I'll eat some carbs, or maybe I'll, not run quite as many miles every day, but I still need to do that for myself. It's really kind of jarring to your mind, body, and spirit when you suddenly stop doing things that were good for you, even if it's in order to, engage in other stuff that's more fun. So I would say plan ahead and try to maintain some threads from your everyday life and weave that through this season so you don't lose touch with yourself, so that you can maintain the self-efficacy and the self-esteem that you build up through your self-care measures. And another thing is then also think about being in the moment. You know, we have a lot of mindfulness practices and we talk about that a lot here at Neolth. And what mindfulness is about showing up and simply being there. And I think this is a great time to practice, because this is a good time to practice looking at your expectations, looking at how you react when your expectations aren't met. Learn a little bit about how other people manage that, because very often, you don't get the present you wanted, or this didn't happen, or that. And so this is a really good time. It's like a laboratory for you to sort of learn a lot more about yourself and how many of us set ourselves up for disappointment. If dad doesn't do this year, or if this doesn't happen, I'm going to be, why plan to be upset rather than saying, I'm going to show up. I have some expectations. We all have expectations, but I'm going to show up and I'm just going to see how this all rides out. I'm going to use some of my techniques, like my breath and exercise, or whatever is working. Journaling, I have that already planned. This is what I'm going to do. And that way, if you can just kind of be in the moment and just sit there and kind of let everything happen, if it starts to overwhelm you, you can always stop and go. But I think that in everyday life, we can kind of get into routines where we don't have these sort of novel challenges. And rather than seeing all of them as challenges, we could see them as opportunities to kind of learn more about yourself, learn more about your family, learn more about your beliefs about this time of year. We have thousands and thousands of years of tradition, and they're really beautiful. And most of them are based in hope and generosity and gratitude. And so those are other things to kind of think about. And, risk being sort of, not being so cynical or so world weary about it. Try to recapture maybe a little bit of that awe and wonder, because this is the time of year when things start to turn around.
Thanks, Dr. Wheeler. A lot of good information there. One of the things that really stuck with me was keeping some of the threads of your old routine. I hear this all the time from students, but again, that change in pace from your lifestyle, from going from busy, final season, or maybe you've graduated and you're working, and then just completely stopping. And I've even noticed this in myself. That can be a time where that anxiety or that depression starts to kind of bubble up again. I think it's really that huge shift in energy and routine. So not needing to keep everything, wanting to create some space for relaxation and self-care, but keeping a couple things, like you said, maybe it's diet, maybe it's exercise, it's a hobby, something that you are doing on a regular basis, trying to keep at least one of those things going throughout the holidays, that could be really beneficial. And maybe it's the Neolth practices that you're keeping going. One of the things that I've kind of struggled with over the holidays, and I'm curious, what you think about this, is taking that time for self-care, and a bit of a mindset shift that I've had throughout the years is actually putting it on like my Google Calendar or something like that and blocking off the time. And you can even tell family or friends, like, this is for work or this is for homework, right? I was told that I need to do whatever it is, these practices or this exercise, or I need to keep up with my routine or do a journal and go back to school and talk about it. I think that it's okay to maybe flip it that way for family if they're having a hard time with you just relaxing. I'm curious, Dr. Wheeler, what you think, if there's kind of short practices that you can integrate into your routine, or just ways that you can communicate with family if they're kind of frustrated that you're maybe relaxing. How do you communicate with them? Hey, this is what I need. This is what I'm going to do.
Yeah, I had to smile at that because it brought back memories. All my kids are grown up now, but every now and then when one of my kids didn't want to do something, and we're standing, it's awkward after school, and it's like they're invited over to some kid's house. There's like, Mom, say no. Tell me I can't go. And it's the same thing. It's like that if you need that, then that's a really useful thing. And I love that idea of, I have this project that I'm doing on the holidays, and it's necessary for what I'm doing, and it's going to take a half hour a day. Another thing that it works well, and I've seen this with my own adult children when they come back, and my daughter is a rock climber, and every day she climbs for an hour, and that's it. We all just have to deal with the fact that she's going to be climbing. But then she's like, and then I will come back, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do that. And before I go, we're going to shop. So one thing that you can do is when you're sharing the things that you need or the little time blocks you want, then say, and also I would love to spend a half hour with you finding out more about, you know, something, or making tea with you, or let's bake some cranberry bread together. So if you can link it with what you're asking for yourself, with something that you have to offer, then you're really in the spirit of the season, right? Because this is all about giving and receiving gifts. And I think it's important to think about what you're giving and putting out as it is what you're receiving. And when you strive to create balance that way, that with other, especially with other people, then I think that a lot of these needs that you have for yourself that are totally legitimate and totally valid. And this is another thing. A lot of times it'll be, you know, maybe there'll be someone like, oh, that diet's stupid, or nobody needs to exercise, or no one needs to wear masks anymore. But you've been doing this and taking care of yourself that way. It's important not to let people invalidate important choices that you made in a very clear frame of mind that are working for you, because you are either fully an adult now or you're almost an adult. And that's one of the tasks of this stage of life, is I'm going to define who I am and what makes me me. And as I was saying before, mindfulness really is helpful, but then sometimes that can just start to feel, oh, I'm paying attention. And what I'm really noticing is a whole bunch of stuff here that I didn't notice before that I kind of don't like. So that's not always the answer. Sometimes just removing yourself is the answer, if only for a couple minutes. And so what I suggest is, you know, get a front porch routine. You know, if you can just step out the front door and maybe take 5 breaths, just sort of, and with each exhale, it's just, I'm just going to let it go, or something like, this is temporary, or I'll be back to normal in 1 week, you know, like I can get through this. One thing that happens, that's a phenomenon in young people, is that time seems much more stretched out. So for a younger person in their 20s compared to me in my 60s, 2 weeks is a long time. For me, it's like poof. And so just a couple minutes, if you, in some fields of psychology, we talk about breaking state, like you just get more and more and more into this negative state. And sometimes all you really need is to just break it. And then it's like, oh yeah, okay, I'm back. So a front porch routine, or, you know, a bathroom routine, you know, it's very normal. We all need to go to the bathroom, right? I need to, I'll be back in a couple minutes. And while you're there, you can look in the mirror. I am, you know, revalidate yourself. Because if you're not in a situation, you know, and I don't want to assume that everyone is going to be in these positive, loving, happy, awesome situations. If you're in a situation where you're not getting much validation, now is the time in your life to start building up these little tiny strategies. When you're in, you know, you have to stay present, but you can take a little break and care for yourself. I really think it's important to maintain your movement routines, whatever it is. And maybe you're someplace where you can't do your daily run, to find some way to keep your body moving, because the best treatment and prevention for depression in particular is exercise. It's better than antidepressants. And especially if you're prone to depression, suddenly becoming sedentary for 2 weeks is really not a good idea. So I would strongly recommend that, even if it's just yoga stretches or dance. And the other thing is, when the mood starts to feel, you know, not comfortable, then sometimes you can take some agency there and say, let's have a dance party, or let's turn on some music, or let's go gather firewood or something. So you can actually start to step into a role where you're kind of helping to make decisions for the group about what do we do next, and kind of, you can notice when that's necessary, and really ultimately to make yourself get through the holidays with a minimum of stress. But also you're giving. Again, this is the season of giving and receiving, and I like to try to think about keeping those things in balance. I think when you keep thinking about that, how much have I given, what am I getting, then you can sort of start to navigate these waters with a little bit more insight.
Wow, the time is just flying by as always. But the 3 themes that I'm really hearing around are expectations, boundaries, and balance. So going into the holidays, there are a lot of expectations. There are some things that we just might have to do, some traditions. And I think that's part of growing up, is that we can't completely avoid stress forever. There are some situations that are stressful, but we're learning how to have tips and strategies to manage those stressors, how to really set good boundaries. It sounds like saying no might be a video series or conversation that we need to have. That's a big part of it. But just knowing, what you're going to do, communicating that with friends and family, and doing that in balance. Here's what I'm going to give. Here's the ways I can contribute. Here's the things I need to receive. Here's the time I need to take for myself. And just being really open and communicating that can be a good strategy, as well as keeping up with your routine, not completely changing everything, but trying to keep at least one or two things that you were doing before kind of throughout the thread of the holidays. So as we're closing, Dr. Wheeler, I just wanted to dive into any last thoughts that you had, and then also thinking of if somebody is really struggling. I know a lot of times schools are closed, the counselors or therapists might not be available, but if somebody is really struggling, what can they do in the moment? And then any last thoughts that you have around managing this holiday pressure?
Indeed, this time flies by so quickly. Yeah, I just want to acknowledge the fact that we are talking about a lot of sort of mid-level to upper-level stressors, but some people are going into a time that is tradition, or that they know is going to be super hard for them. And what it's really important to, in fact, what I would suggest is ahead of time, if you've had issues in the past, like have the phone number for a crisis line or a chat line or a talk line that you feel safe with, that you feel safe reaching out to. If you have friends, like, if you're in college, say you have a friend from college and you won't be with that person, but I have a lifeline. There used to be some game show where you had a lifeline, you could call a friend if you didn't know the answer. So, and you can even set that up ahead of time. It's really helpful to be as preemptive and proactive as you can, but there are people who care. There are systems in place to help you if you're in severe distress. And please, please, please educate yourself about them and reach out to them if you are struggling, because this is the season where a lot of us are very vulnerable emotionally. And finally, I just want to wish everyone as much light and peace and love and joy in this season as you can find.
Thank you, Dr. Wheeler, and thank you everybody for joining us. This was another Neolth Ask the Experts live stream event. As a reminder, you get to choose the topic of these events every month by going into the Neolth app and anonymously voting in our community polls. So we'll see you back January for another Ask the Experts event based on whatever you want us to talk about. As a reminder, also those crisis resources, free 24/7 support available in the Neolth app in your profile section. You can find a lot of different hotlines or text lines if you need to talk to people over the holidays. And Dr. Wheeler, thank you so much for being here today. I appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.